What would you do if your star pilot in your first season with your team begins to perform above your expectations, just when you need it most? The 2025 Singapore Grand Prix was marked in the calendar as a critical career for Ferrari. The Marina Bay layout, an urban circuit with 19 technical curves and a treacherous asphalt even in stable conditions, has always been a complicated battlefield for any equipment that does not have a perfectly balanced aerodynamic package. And that has been precisely the Achilles heel of the SF25 from the preseason. What nobody was expected, nor the most optimistic engineers in Maranello, was that Lewis Hamilton would sign one of his best classifications of the year just in this stage, even leaving Charles Leclerc, the alleged man of trust of the Scuderia. That night in Singapore, the atmosphere was dense. The heat, the reflection of the lights on the asphalt, the noise of the engines bouncing among the buildings, everything contributed to a tension that only those who have lived a Grand Prix and urban circuit can understand. But among all that pressure, Hamilton was cold and calculating. From the first free training, his approach had been different from the usual. He was more present in technical meetings, more communicative with his engineers, and remarkably focused on understanding how to get the maximum of the car in low speed, irregular traction, and brakes subjected to extreme temperatures. In Q3, when the margins are minimal and errors are paid with grid positions, Hamilton brought out their experience. It marked a time of 1:29,688, surpassing Leclerc by 0.096 seconds. These milliseconds, almost imperceptible to the average spectator, locked a history of millimeter strategic decisions. From the most aggressive configuration of rear suspension that allowed a better traction in the slow output curves, to the surgical management of the brake overheating in the intermediate sectors. It was not simply a good return. It was a return built from the foundations. Each sector that toured was the result of a deep adaptation of its driving style to the SF25, something that in previous races still seemed in process. This was the first great sign that Hamilton was beginning to understand the Ferrari, not just to drive it. And that difference is fundamental, because it is not enough to be fast. In Formula One, the pilot who really manages to connect with his car can maximize his performance even when the machine is not the fastest of paddock. The importance of this result goes beyond the timetable. In symbolic terms, he marked the first time in the whole season in which Ferrari could not only count on Leclerc as a reference. For the first time, Hamilton was marking the internal rhythm of the team. For a team with as much history such as Ferrari, where leaderships have been traditionally very defined, this represents a potential reconfiguration of hierarchies. And although in public nobody will say it, within the box's wall the conversation was no longer only on who brought the points, but about who was taking out the real potential of the car. The expression on Frederic Vasseur's face at the end of the classification said everything. It wasn't just surprise. It was a mixture of relief, intrigue, and perhaps a hint of concern. Because when one of your pilots begins to consistently overcome the other and that other has been your support point for years, the internal stability of the team is inevitably challenged. And although Vasseur is a strategist with experience in the management of difficult pilots, the dynamic between Hamilton and Leclerc promises to become one of the most tense and fascinating narrative axes of the rest of the season. It was in Singapore free training where the first signs of transformation began to be noticed. Hamilton began working more intimately with engineers, asking for comparative data with Leclerc, reviewing telemetry not only to match their times, but to understand the logic of each technical decision of the team. He even modified aspects of his driving style. He reduced his tendency to stop late and keep traced more open, and began to imitate the most fluid technique and focused on the minimum curve speed of his partner Monegasco. These small adjustments are not easy to implement when you have been perfecting a style that has given you 7 world titles, but Hamilton understood that if he wanted to shine in Ferrari, he had to reinvent himself. The statements after the free were the first symptom of that new stage. For the first time since Ferrari joined, he was heard enjoying the car. He said textually that it was positive to finally pilot a Ferrari in Marina Bay and discover for himself the differences he had imagined for years. The importance of that phrase is huge, not only for what it implies in terms of personal satisfaction, but because it reveals that, after months of uncertainty, Hamilton began to trust the car. That trust is the basis on which he has always built his best performances. When a pilot stops fighting the car and starts working with him, his level multiplies. In the classification session, all that evolution exploded. The return that placed it in 6th position was not the product of chance. It was the culmination of adjustments, trial and error, and a new understanding of SF25. The extra aerodynamic load that he chose cost him a straight speed, but allowed him to attack the vertices with surgical precision. Its ability to take risks in the narrowest areas of the circuit, such as the curve complex of Sector 3, was what made the difference with respect to Leclerc. It was no longer a Hamilton adapting, it was a Hamilton dictating the conditions. The resurgence was not limited to the stopwatch. It was a statement of intentions for the rest of the paddock. In a season where McLaren and Mercedes threatened to be solid contenders to the title, Ferrari urgently needs a leader who not only adds points, but pushes the technical development and work culture of the team. Leclerc is speed, but Hamilton brings a vision of championship that few can match. The team begins to see it, and most importantly, Hamilton begins to believe it too. All this leaves an uncomfortable but inevitable question floating in the air. If this level is maintained, are we facing a new era of leadership in Ferrari? Because when Hamilton feels comfortable, the next step is usually relentless. Frederic Vasseur is a man of numbers, of plans with precision and cold execution. Since his arrival in Ferrari, he has tried to impose a more rational and less emotional culture, something that historically has been the Achilles heel of the Scuderia. Therefore, when he saw the results of the classification in Singapore, his internal reaction was not only that of a boss satisfied with the good performance of one of his pilots. It was that of a strategist forced to reconfigure their mental maps. Because what happened with Hamilton that night was not in the internal forecasts of the team. Ferrari had arrived in Singapore with moderate expectations. The urban circuit, although favorable to certain characteristics of SF25 such as mechanical grip and tensile traction and slow outputs, also showed its lacks in braking stability and sensitivity to overheating rear tires. Leclerc, with more kilometers and experience in that car, was seen as Ferrari's best letter to extract the maximum of the car in those conditions. But when Hamilton not only matched but surpassed Monegasco in classification, the entire team technical environment had to pause and observe. Vasseur did not express it with words, but in the paddock it is said that his surprise was absolute. Because it was not only time for return, but how it had been created. The telemetry analysis revealed that Hamilton was doing things that Leclerc could not replicate. Greater confidence in lateral support in medium-speed curves, a more progressive traction in the output of the most closed turns, and an ERS management that prioritized the power delivery just at the points of greatest need. These decisions, which seem small, make the difference between a quick and a strategic return. The most striking thing was the psychological impact that this result had within the garage. Until that time, Leclerc was the technical reference. His comments dictated the course of the setup. His feedback was the most listened to at engineering meetings. But in Singapore, for the first time, the engineers on both sides of the garage began to cross information actively. Some Hamilton side technicians were asked to share experimental configurations data that had worked during training. That does not happen unless there is tacit reconfiguration in the internal hierarchy. And thirdly, the dynamics of power within the team have moved. Although Leclerc remains an emotional pillar for the fans and a continuity symbol, Hamilton has begun to build a different narrative, that of the veteran who arrives with winning experience, which takes the flyer of a problematic car and makes it a precision tool. That narrative is powerful both inside and outside the team. Because in Formula One, perception can become as influential as reality. Frederic Vasseur, who had opted for Hamilton as a long-term piece to consolidate Ferrari's ambition, now faces the dilemma of how to manage two natural leaders in the same space. Singapore was the first chapter of that new story. Singapore may have been the starting point, but each starting point needs confirmations. And those confirmations will not arrive with words or nostalgia for the past, but with results consisting of the most demanding clues of the calendar. Will Hamilton be able to maintain this level on high-speed paths such as Suzuka? Can Ferrari give it a car that not only works in specific conditions, but is competitive throughout the technical spectrum of the season? And more importantly, are we seeing the birth of a new era within Ferrari with Hamilton as a change catalyst, or simply the flash isolated from a pilot that once again managed to get gold from where others only see uncertainty? Leave your opinion in the comments.